All right, all everywhere here now. We are back to talk about the mental obsession and emotional sobriety and the potential we have to communicate openly about the things we do that we might think are better hidden or better not mentioned because of the stigma attached to mental health issues, mental illness, and insanity. And Gabe and I took a walk early this morning, and I proposed to him that insanity is not too hard a line to cross. And to think of our own experience as sane when we're entertaining ideas that have no basis as though they're real and true is to enter that realm of insanity and think because we aren't completely incapacitated presently by it, that we're fine and that we're doing great. And that all the other conflicts inside the emotional turmoil that we think keeping to ourselves saves us from being seen, we're still witnessing very accurately as something that's very disturbing. So one of the things I wanted to do this morning, since we're back after a week off that was little out of our normal order. So we're going to do the next 2 weeks, this week and next week. So we'll have new episodes both Sundays, including the last Sunday, which will be next week. And I wanted to focus on some questions and see if we can engage in a more principled way rather than in a way where we tell the story about the things we're struggling with, which are effects. All those stories are effects of things that we're causing. And I would rather refocus on the cause that we're causing so that we can look at what we're starting rather than think about how to stop the thing that we overlook. We actually turn the effects into the cause when we're treating them. We're trying to talk about the stories as though they're the effects. We're actually jumping over the cause by doing that because we're turning the effects into the cause. And addiction typically is a reversal of the order of things. The natural order of the universe is turned upside down because it's trying to make what's false true and what's not reality. So what is that? Effectively, a thought I have that I think is true. And then I operate on that basis when, in fact, the thought I have can't possibly replace reality, nor can it fulfill reality, because if reality and truth are real and true, it is already absolutely the nature of our existence and always has been. I don't need to add to it and I can't subtract from it. It is a negotiation because it's essential to my experience. It isn't something that I can choose to have or not have. It isn't optional. But if that natural state of being is the natural state of our existence, then reality and truth are not something we're ever going to get to because it's not a place. It's not because we can't get there. It's because we've always been there. And the majority of the experience we're having, while I say majority only because we also know that this knowing is our heritage and our essence, we know it or we wouldn't know so quickly when things are wrong and out of place and out of order and awkward and unstable. Those things wouldn't be clear to us if instability and awkwardness and embarrassment and fear and all those things that we create in this thinking were normal. Wouldn't occur to us that something's wrong. We would just think it's normal and we would be at ease with that normalcy. So what I want to do is ask some questions, and I wrote these out and sent them to everybody in the email and see if we can focus the conversation on these ifs effectively. If any perfect essence exists, is it essential? So that's a question. Is it essential? And would feeling it exists, meaning we're thinking it exists, confirm it? Would it confirm the essence, or would it simply confirm what we're thinking and feeling? So that's a question. And you guys have these written out too, because I sent them out. Could or do thoughts about reality and truth impact reality or truth? Or would their impact be limited to the believer's determined thoughts? My thoughts. My thoughts are determined because I choose them. When I choose them and think they're real, now I'm determined to prove them. Just like when I thought I could enjoy my drinking, I continued to drink in massive quantities to prove I could control it. pretty insane idea that I would do more and more of something that I'm actually trying to prove I have control over by acting out of control. You can see the grind there. It's the same thing with something, a lie. A lie only exists as long as in a thought, in a brain. Lies don't exist anywhere but in brains. It only exists as long as I think it's the opposite of what it is, which is true. Meaning that if its only claim is to be what it isn't, I'm even admitting in the claim that a lie can't even be a lie. Because when a lie is a lie, it's not a lie. It's claiming only to be the opposite. That's how this reversal, which I would say is the primary addiction to ego, to thoughts as reality, the primary addiction is to lying. And if I'm lying about who I am by thinking what I think about my thinking is who I am, which would be ego, effectively, and actually the word ego even is described as I, capital I, and we would be talking here about a small I, because it's simply a thought about a thought that we claim all of a sudden becomes who we are because we think our thoughts are real and true. And it seems to immediately cause us this idea that who we are is all we think, or that all we are is what we think. It should be a major grind. So would the impact of the believer's determined thoughts impact reality or truth, or simply our thinking? So if thoughts create and control reality and truth, wouldn't they be the creator of life's power and completely out of our control? If in fact life was based on thinking. Now, clearly thinking is important to our survival, as we talked a little bit before we went live. Instincts guide us to do things that keep us alive, to survive and thrive. But these internal conflicts, emotional conflicts, actually create reactive, impulsive, and compulsive behaviors, all of which are suicidal tendencies. They're all asking for irresponsibility to be our nature, for disconnectedness to be our nature, for our problems to be real and true, and our thoughts to be real and true against all other thoughts. We're asking for non-existence. We're asking not to exist. We're actually arguing not to exist, not to be a part of anything. Very interesting. Versus acknowledging that we're already a part of everything. We've always been a part of everything. And we're not some small part, we're part of the whole thing on a spiritual level, on whatever that level is that we don't think about or have to think about to be, that knowingness, that absolute capitalized knowingness, that absolute capitalized presence, that absolute capitalized I. And isn't it interesting that we always, even mid-sentence, in using the word I, never use a small I, we always use a capital I. When in fact, the small I looks a lot like a head with a body. Just doesn't have arms and legs to get it anywhere. But that capital I is the essence we share in terms of an ultimate self. It's an awareness of awareness that we share, we know, and if that's the case, talking about it, thinking about it, might actually align our thinking with that rather than make believe we have to get to it, start to realize we're already there. We're just so preoccupied with this obsessive nature of thinking, being consumed by it, being intoxicated by it, thinking we're going to someday turn it into reality and truth. The longer we go, the harder we go. That's exactly what happens with any addiction, because this is the primary addiction. So the allergy of this addiction, the abnormal reaction, is to do more of the same thing, thinking it will get better. It's exactly what addiction does. So if things are as things are, is it honest or sane to think they are nothing more or less than how we think of them or what we think of them? Another question. If things are as they are, then what I think about them is what I'm thinking. It has nothing to do with those things. So I don't really even have a relationship to everything by making believe how I think about them is what they are. I'm making a transition there that's once again confirming this idea that my reality is my thinking, and it isn't. If it were my thinking, I would be satisfied with the manifestations. And since the manifestation of obsessive thinking is depression and anxiety disorders and insanity, it's not very fulfilling because it's an impossibility to satisfy. It's an insatiable desire to get to get something right that's absolutely wrong. It's never going to happen.
Can I touch on that?
One quick question, Mike, MK, and then we'll be done. If we have free will to determine our thoughts, and we can observe the thoughts we choose, which is, again, a question. If you can observe your thoughts, and I would say we're always observing them, because generally when we're seemingly talking to ourselves, we're actually watching our thoughts, talking to them with another thought. So we're actually talking to our thoughts. We're never talking to ourselves, but it indicates this terminology we use that we really believe who we are is what we're thinking. But if we have free will to determine our thoughts and we can observe the thoughts we choose, who are we? Clearly, we're not the thoughts if we can observe them. And if we're in a dialogue with them, we must be observing them. There must be some place. If we were our thoughts, we would be in them. We couldn't see them any more than our eyeballs can see our eyes or our nose can smell our nose. My eyeball never sees itself except as a reflection. Actually, we never see our face the way it is except as a reflection. It's always backward the way we see it. So those are the questions. We can repeat them or go back into them if you'd like, but let's see if we can focus on that as a group and talk about it from the premise of principled existence, meaning this is fundamental to existence and essential to existence, not an optional, negotiable thing based on our circumstances, situations, and consequences that we're struggling with. MK. So welcome, everybody.
Sorry, I didn't understand the test. I didn't know when I could go.
That's all right.
Well, that was if things are as they are, is it honest or saying to think of them more or less than what we think of them? That's something that I've been doing a lot of reflection on recently. There's like every day I identify where I was creating narratives for things that would happen or occur throughout the day. And I've related back to something that I see other people doing that I stopped doing, which is I don't call people anymore to tell them about things I'm thinking about doing. Like I used to do that all the time. I'd be like, oh, let me call my mom real quick. Let me see what she thinks about this. Let me call my dad.
That's why I never hear from you anymore.
Basically. Because I just identified that all I start to do is struggle with the decision I wanted to make originally. The decision completely changes. And as I talk to each person, I can get frustrated. I can get demotivated because they don't see it the way I see it. They don't understand it. And at the end of the day, I'm like, well, fuck them anyways. They don't know what I'm talking about. So I just identified that it wasn't conducive to things that I think are going to be good for me or my family. Fast forward.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say fast forward. I've just learned to share what I've done more so than share what I'm thinking about what is happening. And by the end of what I'm referring to, an example would be today. I got something that I think I would have blown my lid off. I got a bill from the IRS. And I was like, oh, okay, we'll just address it. And that's it. I feel completely indifferent about it. It's just something I need to take care of when the weekend's over. I mean, I'm literally not stressed, concerned, calling this person, can you believe, and all these things, adding my experience to the letter I got as if that's going to change the fact that I need to address the letter that I got.
So I'm going to suggest something.
Please do.
And again, this is for the entire group and everyone listening. If reality and truth are reality and truth and they don't change, you cannot get any simpler than that.
Mm-hmm.
There's no complexity in that. They're always exactly present. They don't seem to operate in space and time. So whenever any of us concede they're present and utilize them, they're always available. And I would say we're utilizing them all the time, but we're so preoccupied in this thinking we do, thinking about our own reality and our own truth, which isn't true or real, that we are discounting that awareness we have and that knowingness we have and that stability we have, which is why we feel unstable and imbalanced and discord, where you can feel the inner conflict and you can feel the emotional turmoil. So my experience, and again, I don't speak for any of you, I don't speak to any of you in any other way than allow you to look at this and give you a chance to see. Nobody's going to hear what I say if they don't want to hear it at all. So I'm not doing anything to try to insist anybody listen. It's a choice to listen. It's a choice to choose. It's a choice to observe. It's a choice to watch what you're doing. That's what freedom of choice is. It's not because I say it. If you didn't know these things, you would never be able to come to terms with them in the way I am and I do, in the way you just described also, MK, and that everybody you talk to couldn't see it your way. So the basis here is, if you think your thoughts are truth and reality, those phone calls are looking for people to confirm your truth and reality because you know it's not real. You know you need support. You know you need co-conspirators, as Janet always talks about it. You need somebody to say, yes, you're right. Why? Because you know you're wrong. You know there's doubt. It's immediate. We look to others to then blame for not agreeing with the insanity we're perpetuating. We should be thanking them. They're actually giving us credit, or they're actually giving us perspective on the credit that is due our own doing, rather than being responsible for the cause of what we're thinking they're doing. And you can see how quickly we can get enmeshed in what they're doing based on this idea that our thoughts are real and true. So it becomes very slippery to continue to repeat the same behavior when you start noticing, oh, if my thoughts aren't real, if they're just imagined, if I'm just conjuring these images up, this narrative, then it's a story I'm telling. The story always seems to go on when it comes to thinking. It just goes on and on and on and on. And there's no problem with it when I start looking at it accurately, because I just see that it's a natural tendency of thought to develop a narrative to help support what it's thinking, but it doesn't mean what it's thinking is reality and truth. So it isn't intractable. Like reality and truth aren't changeable, so they're intractable. I can't even choose them. They're a whole different dimension and realm than the one I think about, where I choose and do things. That's my human aspect. The being aspect of knowing doesn't have any choice. It already is everything. It already is what it is. It doesn't choose to be what it is because it doesn't have any doubt about what it is, and it doesn't have any option. It is what it is in its own totality. So it's the thinking we're doing about that we're conflicted with primarily. If the basis of my thinking is that thinking is true and real, everything I think about is contaminated with that. Katie has joined us, having just finished her play last night. So do you see that, MK?
Definitely. The other thing that I started to identify as I would, like this morning, was clearly the most recent experience. I started to see that I would now go into, oh, I wonder if so-and-so got this letter, how they would respond. Or, oh, he would probably say this, or she would, and I just go, there you go again. Like you're on a walk with your wife right now. Like that's all we're doing. That's all we're actually doing. That is happening. But yeah, it's a
couple of options in that. You can change that behavior because you think you shouldn't be doing it, or see that behavior is always going to come from that underlying thought being real and true in your own imagination. It's always going to do that. You're always going to look for validation. You're always going to look for confirmation. You're always going to look for support. Because you feel empty. You don't feel worthy. You don't feel valuable. So what are you looking for? Other people to confirm it, other people to give it to you, other people to give you the same thing. And what do you find? They never do. And if they do, it's very often conciliatory and not as genuine as their own experience, because
it
they
always
too.
Is.
What's that?
It always is. It's never fucking genuine. You can't make somebody feel or think something. They'll agree with you just because they're enabling or whatever, but it's not sincere, very rarely.
Well, it can be. And the point is that if this addiction has been as pervasive as it is, everyone is married to their ideas as being true and real. So they never see it the way anyone else does, or it wouldn't confirm their own commitment to their own ideas and ideals about what's right and true, because it's been what they think has been right and real and true. So when you're looking, MK, for them to confirm it, they're also looking at what you're doing as something that's completely different from what they're doing, when what they're doing is the same thing with different faces, places, times, and circumstances attached to it, which is what are used to give this sort of sense of differentiation and distinction. And yet it's the exact same thing, because it's the primary motivation underlying it that these ideas are true and real. As soon as we think that all we are is what we think. And yet it's interesting that we can talk to ourselves, being distinct from the thinking we're doing, to be in an inner dialogue. We're actually talking to ourselves. There must be some awareness still left over, even within the insanity, that we are free of our thoughts, that we are distinct from our thoughts. So the absolute's always revealed in everything we do. If we're looking at it clearly, it starts to add up. So if things are as things are, is it honest or sane to think they are nothing more or less than what we think about them? Which was the question, right? That was the one you hit on, MK.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, it was.
So in thinking about these as fundamental and principled is something that we all share equally, equitably, indiscriminately, without distinction. We share that. That's the us. In that last question, who are we? Who would we be if we can watch our thoughts, but the watcher of those thoughts, not the beer of those thoughts, not the thing we think we are, but the actual watcher, the essence, the thing that seems obvious in meditation, that seems to be less obvious when we get into circumstances and issues that seem challenging, like the letter from the IRS. Circumstances can easily be overwhelming. And I would suggest most of that overwhelm is attached to thoughts we think should be happening as a result of what we think and feel are real, or what we think is real, what we think is true. Nothing else. That's what overwhelms us, gets beyond the limits of those thoughts. It isn't happening the way I think it should happen. It isn't happening the way I wanted it to happen. It isn't happening as I wished it would happen. And yet it's happening exactly as it's happening. And we're not very skilled at just allowing that to happen. And I'm included in that. My process is very subject very often to ideas I have about how things should be. And it isn't to suggest I can't or shouldn't have those ideas, but it's learning to be freer with the consequences of those ideas. And my sense is, I hope greater sense, is that intention is actually what happens, not what I thought should happen or what I wanted to have happen. It's actually what happens. And if responsibility is absolute in our absolute state of being, then we're always responsible for what's happening as it's happening, not what should have happened, could have happened, would have happened, we wished would happen. None of that stuff has any bearing at all on reality, only bears on the thinking we do. And again, when I think my thoughts are true, I think all of those things are all I should be thinking about, because somehow I'm going to magically change the past to create a new present because I'm so dissatisfied that I didn't end up where I thought I would be. Morning, JP.
40.
So the practice is talking about it openly and starting to interact on that principled basis. And notice that as we share that, it becomes more obvious. As we share in our conversation, it becomes more obvious that we share this in our essence, that it's an essential basis of our existence, not an optional, here or there, coming or going sort of thing. It's always present. It's always complete. It's always whole. It's always the basis, which I've suggested before, gives us the clarity of knowing what's wrong. And we seem to all have great confidence in knowing what's wrong in the world. While we don't always seem to have the same confidence in knowing what's right in our own experience. We can be reactive and righteous, but I wouldn't say that's right. I would say that's just a defense against something that isn't true, because a lie is always defensive because it's not even claiming to be what it is, claiming to be everything else but what it is. That would be a very defensive posture to take, very reactive. JP, you came in a minute late. Did you read the questions that I sent? I think you did.
Negative.
Oh. So basically, we're asking questions like, if any perfect, and same with Katie. I don't know, Katie, I know you got it. And I don't know you read through it, but if any perfect essence exists is essential, would feeling it exists confirm it, or only what we feel? That's a question. And could or do thoughts about reality and truth impact reality and truth? Or would their impact be limited to the believer's determined thoughts about reality and truth?
The latter.
Yeah. And if thoughts create and control reality and truth, wouldn't they be the creator of life's power and completely out of our control?
Unknown. Unknown.
Well, if they were happening on their own, and sort of like the way that the universe operates right now, seems to be happening on its own, doesn't seem like I have any control over how it's happening. So if thoughts actually had their own life, I would be interacting with them. I wouldn't be in control of them. I could think I was, just like I think I'm of control of other people and other ideas and my other thoughts about what should be happening. And it kind of leads back to the fact that we have freedom of choice to choose what we think. And as a result, we're responsible for what we're experiencing. Since everything we're thinking about creates an effect, and the effect is our experience, essentially and effectively. If we have free will to determine our thoughts and we can observe those thoughts, we choose, who are we? Another question.
Yeah, that's where you and I diverge. You think it's about
You just froze.
just the thinking from the thinking. I'm sorry.
No, I just think the primary impact on our experience is caused by our thinking. Because if we weren't thinking, we would not be in a conflicted state. We would be in a peaceful, if we were in a coma. I haven't ever experienced anybody coming out of a coma with emotional depression.
And I think that comes from the thinking.
Yeah.
Yeah, we all do.
Yeah. No, the impact on our experience is largely what we think. And yet it sort of gives credence to the fact that we don't have to think about reality and truth for reality and truth to provide us the chance to think or the opportunity. So it kind of confirms, again, here's how the absolute reveals itself. We don't have to think about it at all. Now, if I suggested we don't have to think about reality and truth on its face, it would seem ridiculous not to ever think about reality and truth, because it would seem insane to think that we would be thinking of things that weren't real and true. And yet within the confines of obsessive thinking, it's exactly what we're doing. Thinking about things as though they're true that we've just imagined, that we've concluded are true, that we decided are true. It doesn't make them true. It makes us deciders and concluders of what we think is true and what we think is real, which would naturally mean that we are overcoming, overpowering, and displacing reality and truth, which couldn't possibly happen. An infinite source can't be displaced because it has no place. It doesn't function in the fourth dimension. It's the totality of all dimensions. The essence of essence.
I think the essence of who we are is an incorruptible innocence.
Incorruptible. Yeah, very good. I would agree. I would think that certainly takes us a step away from a shameful guilt.
Which we're all masters at.
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty good at developing that.
Yeah.
But think of those words, incorruptible, meaning that it's essential, it's an infinite, it's not something that's affected by anything because it's the essence of everything. And innocence would obviously mean what's interesting is it means we can't be guilty.
Right.
Because we've been given an essence. Now we're dealing in an essence of essence rather than the thinking about it. The thinking generates the guilt, just like the thinking generates the irresponsible ideas and the lies. Lies don't exist. If lies exist in the universe, if there's a devil that's been split off from God, which is a very popular notion in many religions, that power has no real power that isn't supposed, because its claim is that it's distinct and separate from all power. So that power would be based on a lie too, so it effectively has no control over us, nor can we have any control over it, because it would be nothing to control.
And that's
Just
why
like
there's no right or wrong.
What's that?
That's why there's no right or wrong.
In that realm, yes. And I would say in our realm, what's right are things that work, that function, that are beneficial, that are generous, that are supportive of others. Because if I can align myself with nature and function in a certain way that everyone else could benefit from, the simple functioning of that way would offer everyone a chance to see how, rather than think about it in conflicted ways, they can operate and do something, just like farmers. Everybody knew how to plant seeds, but I think it was George Washington Carver who collected seeds and took them to farmers and helped them understand how they could grow products that supported the other products they were growing, and also grow a diversity of products rather than one product. Spent his lifetime with a horse filled with seeds. He got better at teaching people, and people got better as a result because he was aligning what he was teaching with nature. He was giving them insight into what was actually happening. It's a lot more beneficial than sitting around trying to think about things that aren't true as being true and wondering why we're in a constant state of friction and dysfunction.
Yeah,
Or not having things produce what we expect they might.
that thing I texted you last week when I said, I feel so useful. Because things were falling into place again and again and again. And it wasn't coincidence. It was the gift of responsibility, which gave me neutrality. And then things were just fine. There wasn't a parade and there wasn't a dip. It was just, I felt so useful.
Yeah.
Things were
Well,
working.
it's useful to be useful, by the way. It's very simple.
It doesn't make it the opposite because it's two of the same. Useful makes you useful.
Well, it confirms just like the lie confirms the lie, because it creates all these fractured states and stories to make believe that somehow the newer story, the new version of the story, the new version of the story is going to be help to refine the lie, when in fact it just perpetuates it.
Useful.
It's really the same thing.
Yeah.
The difference is that one benefits everyone and the other one undermines everyone's benefit.
And it's cumulative. If we were all useful, there'd be no conflict.
Well, there would certainly be there would be so much abundance that people would be struggling to get rid of stuff like Anthony thinks he's trying to do with his storage.
I could help him with those surfboards.
I mean, think of the fact that we've been given this planet with everything on it, nothing that has ever been shipped in from any other planet, other than the sun's rays that obviously produce what grows here. So everything's either grown since the planet started, but it all developed on the basis of nature. We haven't been able to exhaust it yet. As hard as we're trying, we're doing everything we can to try to use it all up, and it still seems to have more. Imagine if we weren't wasting what we waste and misusing what we're misusing and allowing fish to grow at a rate that allows them to continue to develop and grow, and there would be more and more and more and more. We would be struggling with abundance. And it wouldn't even be a struggle, because we would have the wisdom to notice that we don't have to put a cap on nature. We don't have to limit the potential of nature to do what it does, because if the fruit falls to the ground, it nourishes the soil for the next generation. And when the fish die, there's a process that's designed to function in that way. And we intercede on its behalf in ways that are not always very useful and helpful, and are very threatening to our own existence in the name of trying to secure our existence. Excess, pretense, all that sort of thing that we do to have more and more and more actually threatens us. It does not secure us. It may give us a temporary opinion of security, but that is not security. It's temporary, short-lived.
Which is all bred from fear, though. That greed is just bred from fear. If everyone could.
Yeah. Well, think of a self that we think we are, and know it isn't who we are, would have to be born in fear automatically, even to perpetuate it. That's what the basis of a lie is, always the fear of being found out. Why? Because we think it's hiding, and it isn't hiding with any of us. The anxiety, the stress, the depression, the fractured state of our own dysfunction are all on full display for everyone to see. And we even admit them, like MK was talking about. We call people to try to discuss it and get their support.
Yes, we do.
It's very overt while we think it's hidden, while we think we're keeping it to ourselves.
But we know we're really not.
Well, we can think, thinking we know that we're not doing it is very different than knowing we're not doing it. I would say if we know, we always know. And if we think we don't know, we generally obviously know on the one end, but may think we don't know. And that's the blindness of addiction. That's that seeming blank spot. We just think we don't know. And that's a thought, certainly, something we're welcome to have, but it causes an effect that causes more awareness of the thing we're claiming not to be doing, ironically, and not ironically, because that's how the absolute reveals itself.
But we shouldn't ever have to claim. I feel like if I'm defending or claiming anything, it's not real anyway, because what is just is. Why would I ever have to claim or defend or tell you something that I am? I just am.
A little challenge, because I agree with you, and I suspect you're right on the button, but if a tightrope walker only walked in perfect balance, he'd never make it to the other end. And the fact is, when we're navigating life, we're always veering left and right of that razor's edge of what's right and what's absolute and what's knowable. We're always stepping in directions that may not be. Even when we walk, there's an instability in the walking that goes on. Not every step is equal, and we trip over things unexpectedly because there's a slight variation in the sidewalk's height or a stone or something in our way, and we don't notice it. And those things are normal for us. The flexibility, it's like yoga. It's mental yoga to learn to be flexible enough to adjust to those things as they happen and recognize that they're just possibilities. And if all things are possible, it's very possible to go wrong as it's possible to go right. And if we can come to terms with that, literally in a way that actually comes to terms with it rather than superficially acknowledges it, then whatever happens all of a sudden becomes a lot more acceptable and a lot more valuable than what we think should have happened or could have happened or would have happened or we wished would happen, because now we're fixated on all the things we should have done that we can't ever change. While we're in the face of everything we can change, we're focused on things that will never change and wonder why our present feels empty and disconnected.
Well, I just experienced wanting to conjure up core behavior. Last Tuesday, my baby daddy transcended. He died, and he's probably the person that I've had the longest relationship with in my entire life, 44 years. I met him on my 21st birthday, and longer than my parents, longer than anyone, because we had a child together. And it was a thing. It was a pretty big thing. And then I had guests coming like the very next day, and I wanted to resent them, and I wanted to feel entitled to maybe ask them not to come or to be irritated with them while they were here. And I just kept going back to the reality is that it's, first of all, nothing was their fault whatsoever, but I could feel myself like every few hours wanting to conjure up like an irritation or a judgment or something that I wanted to justify because of my angst over having lost this human being. And it didn't happen. It just didn't happen. And I'm kind of astonished still. But I did have that instinct for my poor behavior to want to justify, to act out, because that's just what I've known. I wanted to be able to tell you how irritating it was to have these people under my roof for 3 days, the day after someone that was so important to me died. And you know what? It didn't happen.
Well, consider too, Jana, that when we call it instinct and it's based on obsessive thinking, it's not instinct any more than it would be sane.
Oh, there you
know
go.
what I'm saying? Like we talked about a little bit earlier, this instinct gets flipped backwards, just like everything gets reversed. If we're trying to make what's false true, we're trying to see the world backward. We're seeing it through a lens that's backward. And instincts now become threats to our life rather than protect us from life. And it sounds to me that you had the presence of mind sufficient to notice that there was a instinct, seemingly, that was coming from something that wasn't very supportive of the process and wasn't very inclusive, and was that you could see the disturbance at the same time that you knew the impulse was there.
Yes.
And that I would say is you're starting to sort of achieve a level of neutrality like MK was talking about, where you start looking at it and saying, wow, I don't have to do any of those things anymore. I don't feel compelled to find the people I need to pick up the phone and call to complain about it and talk about it, or even better, what you're pointing out, to develop a story so that you can have a new story to tell about what's wrong in the world and what's wrong with other people and how tired you are of it and all that kind of stuff. I am sick and tired of stuff all the time, which tells me I am absolutely sick and tired of my own thinking. The repetition of it couldn't be greater because it's going on in the immediacy of my own pleasure and pain source. Wherever that thinking goes on is exactly where my pleasure and pain comes from. Who could affect me more than my own thinking? Nobody. To think that way is to once again try to divest my own responsibility for what I'm doing. And I wouldn't say I've gotten good at this. I'd say I've gotten better at it. And the better is starting to have the perspective and say, oh, you're actually seeing the flexibility that I was talking about with respect to the tightrope walker, watching it happen and then starting to adjust accordingly and say, oh, I don't have to do either. I don't have to do either extreme. I don't have to fight it, and I don't have to pretend it's not there. I can just notice it, and I don't have any obligation to act on it. That's the beginning of the freedom, that recovery from the obsessive thinking the only thing I can do is the only choice I have, and I have to do it because I have no other option. And if you listen to people's language, they will repeat that consistently over things they did that they didn't like the results of, saying they had no other option, they had no other choice. That's an excuse. Choice always allows not to be chosen. In a sense, if our knowing nature is absolute, there is not much to say.
Exactly. There's so many words are saved, so much falsities that don't have to be shared, little stories created that then I call some. MK's thing was perfect for me. Absolutely 100%. I feel like I could totally relate to that. The responsibility of neutrality. It's amazing. So many words.
Our transition in here, which we've gotten up to, we're sort of nuzzling up against, is that if we've spent a lot of our life looking for allies to help support the thinking we're doing that's not true or real, we've really been surrounding ourselves with people that haven't ultimately supported us in the best ways, but have actually conspired with us to maintain the ideas we have about the worst things we're doing.
Correct.
And I would say society is a good reflection of that in general.
Enabling.
Yeah, it's enabling at the core, but on the surface, it's the storytelling and the recruiting and the enrollment of people that pat you on the back and tell you, say all the things to kind of help you feel better about it. But there still seems to be this underlying current of doubt and uncertainty and insecurity, vulnerability.
That's why you need all those words to shore it up, because it just is.
So in relation to the questions, if we're starting to talk about the principles as being something we share, now we can start talking simultaneously about actions we can take that will affect everyone in the group and everyone everywhere in the most meaningful, productive, and useful way. Because we can start, rather than say, nobody will ever get this, nobody will ever understand this, humans just don't want to do it, they're predisposed to this, that, and the other thing that I find people very quick to do, including myself. I think of it as an impossibility at times because it seems so overwhelming, but it's only because I'm thinking about it in the individuation of my own thinking that seems to be true. So our conversation, if we bend in that direction, starts being, what can we do even in our conversation to consider everyone, everywhere, and everything everywhere, simply by noticing that if there is an absolute basis to existence, we already share it. And if our ability to align ourselves with things more accurately has helped us begin to be free of the compulsive thinking we do and the impulsive reactions we have, the reactions, impulsivity, and then maybe the alignment with this is an absolute state of being that we know and everyone else knows becomes the precursor of a conversation that allows people to wake up immediately, because now they are presumed to know everything rather than thought of as having to hear us or anyone tell them something. Follow? If we know it, we already know it. And when you're coming to terms with those things, you're simply eliminating the preoccupation of this mousetrap, this, what do they call those hamster wheels? Where the faster the hamster runs, the faster the wheel goes. And it's got to go faster and faster and faster and faster and faster. And that's effectively what obsessive thinking does. It just creates a preoccupation of our attention that gives us the sense it's all that's happening, but it isn't all that's happening. Everything that's happening is still happening while I preoccupy myself with a very narrow focus of attention on something I think I need to think more about to fix, when in fact it's the thinking about it that's wrong to begin with that broke it. So if we share this, and it's essential, this is an open conversation and a meditative conversation about a shared awareness that we already have, and it isn't limited to us because we may be thinking about it and talking about it. It is unlimited in every respect, so includes everything and everyone, everywhere. Everywhere there's a where, and everywhere beyond what would be considered where, here and there. Gabe, I forget what you mentioned earlier about physics in relation to this.
Yeah. I'm here in relation to what exactly?
To this infinite source, and being able to actually address it in a way that it doesn't really confirm it because it's already confirmed because it exists, but it allows the thinking to begin to be ordered properly by being a consequence of it, or subject to it. We become subjects of it rather than creators of it. Obsessive thinking wants to be creator of the universe, wants to be God, wants to think that what we think is truth and reality when in fact it's not. And in this regard, we're now starting to express what that knowing nature is that is indivisible. And
It was either the thing of like when you try and pinpoint it, or you try and point at it, it's gone. When we were talking about time and
right, and making points.
Making points.
Yeah.
Be careful about making points.
Well, I think so. Your point on the physics end was that as soon as you decide there's a point, it's really not there.
Yeah, it's the whole quantum entanglement thing too, that as soon as you look at an electron, it's in one location or another. and you
It's
can't
gone.
predict, and you can't look at it. You're effectively looking at it changes its outcome.
Well, and my suspicion is if the thoughts we have that are opposed to reality and truth create the weighty impressions that lead to depression, then the inaccuracy of our observation of protons and other things out there that are based on the presumption of our thinking are bearing the weight of what we're thinking. We're seeing the impact just like we witness the impact on our own experience, because those things aren't separate from us. They're very much a part of us, and we are a part of them. It isn't one way and not the other. You follow?
Yeah, our bodies of water that we talked about, and we are all part of it.
Well, but our consciousness, if the things we're thinking about aren't completely true and we're looking at them as though we know what they are, then the thinking we're doing about them is impressing something on them, giving us an impression that we're making a big impression, when in fact it's just a dent we're creating by the weightiness of thinking that isn't absolute. If we were actually observing them accurately, I'm not sure that we would have that impression. If we were simply watching as observers without the preoccupation of thought, my sense is those things would be doing whatever they're doing, and we wouldn't expect them to be in a certain place. We'd expect them to be every place, because they're not ultimately limited to any place, which is why we seem surprised that they're able to move these distances. But I would suspect they're already in all those places. We're just happening to witness them as a superficial experience, when in fact the substantive nature of them is absolutely immersed and emerged or interactive in every way possible.
Yeah, I again want to bring up Einstein's biggest blunder is he took 3 dimensions into 4 in space, in curved space and time, and his cosmological constant in the initial field equations was there because he couldn't imagine the universe not being stable or static. He just didn't want it to be expanding. So he fixed the equation so that it wouldn't expand. But
well, and I didn't mention this earlier when you hit on that, but it's occurring to me now, is it sort of presumes that his calculation, his mathematics, had to identify an infinite reality mathematically, rather than begin to see that mathematics may express that infinite reality in the impossibility of concluding it, the same way that that impossibility for us in our thinking is, it's impossible for us to conclude something that's already conclusive, because it doesn't need our thinking.
yeah.
You follow?
Yeah, science is not making things up. It's just discovering them. It's not.
Well, and yet a lot of it is coming at them with presumptions of expecting what they want to see, and as a result, confusing what's actually being watched and looked at.
That's exactly what Einstein did.
Yeah. So my sense is, if we already know it, we know it in a way that we don't have to think we know it to know it, but it provides us the stability to recognize the effects of our thinking when we're out of order and displaced and feel a lack of worth and a lack of value. We're at least beginning to potentially notice it's the thinking we're doing that's causing that effect, not the universe that puts us at risk because it's unstable. But the universe is in perfect order. It doesn't mean the things within it seem to be functioning the way we think they should, because we're not thinking about everything as it functions. We're still trying to figure out what it's all doing. Rather than, if we had a relationship to it where we conceded fully that it was already doing what it's doing as it's doing it, and we had that knowledge that we know what that is because it's doing it perfectly and always has, my suspicion would be that there would be a lot more intuitive conclusions in science, rather than using process of elimination, which means you've got to go through every possibility to finally get to one that works. Or, you're going to be somewhere in that spectrum of going through possibility after possibility after possibility to try to figure out what actually works in relation to what you're trying to achieve. I suspect that intuitive nature would be very quick to inform us, because the information we'd be getting from those things we concluded we knew everything about or knew something about that was incorrect would be communicating with us freely rather than having us preoccupied with thinking that we would not be able to hear what it was saying any more than we seem to hear other people say what they're saying when all we're thinking about is what we think they're saying.
But just something that popped into my head, isn't it interesting that it's been only 40 years of personal computing, and we have those people who are now looking at quantum computing, and we still have people making wars using the fist and the club, in this case the tank and the missile, but to express themselves or to get their idea of what's truth and reality across.
Well, and you just pointed to it. It's always about an idea. It's always about a thought. And how scared must we be about the thoughts we have to think that killing other people is the only way that we can manage them? I mean, think about that.
But there's a duality there. There's those that want to go to Mars and quantum computing and like you said, the Salvation Army and all of that. And then there's the other side too. There's the death and destruction.
Well, I would say they're only sides that appear separate, but are very much part of the whole. And my expectation is that people who want to go to Mars are trying to get away from here because of the seeming impossibility here when we have attributes that would be conducive to life in innumerable ways that don't exist on Mars. And I think it's a run for our life because we seem to think that we have given up on the possibility of us actually beginning to come to terms with reality and live in a way that would be affordable enough to afford people the capacity and abundance that's always been given us in a freely, peaceful, non-allergic, non-allergen way. Where you don't
you talk about a sick thought trying to go to different planets that can't sustain us.
Yeah, I mean, think of that. We can imagine doing that, but we can't quite imagine actually noticing that the real issue in this planet is not the wars and not the impossibility of everybody else agreeing, but the possibility that we already have a basis for agreement that we're simply not talking about. And as a result, we're acting on those fractured thoughts in ways to try to prove we're right when in fact we're wrong. Through history, I'm not a real history buff, but I've done some reading. It seems to me that things that were presented, like the Copernicus and people starting to see that the sun was not at the center of the universe, our solar system was not at the center of the universe, Earth wasn't at the center of the universe, that it didn't take a long time, just like adding zero to mathematics. It took time for people to incorporate what zero meant in the concept of mathematics. And prior to that, they couldn't carry numbers. They couldn't reduce huge numbers to things that could be written on a single piece of paper because they had to be put on hash marks that were on volumes and volumes and volumes of stone tablets, simply to calculate things. And while there tends to be resistance, there's also quick acceptance to something that works, because once people apply it, it starts working. They talk about it in ways that are applicable to other people and receivable. And all of a sudden it becomes just natural, because it is natural. It's always been natural. So we incorporate those things very quickly compared to the time it's taken us to fracture the ideas about how impossible it would be to have those ideas incorporated and bring the peace and bring the unity and bring the intuitive insight that would allow abundance to even grow and be more abundant than it's always been in ways that would serve people who are today suffering and struggling with some of the most essential water and clean air and clothing and food. We've still got people on this planet that are struggling with those things. So it would be some evidence of a depreciated thinking rather than a depreciated planet or universe.
Yeah, I'm as guilty as the others. I want my new iPhone.
Well, I don't suspect there's anything wrong with those things. My suspicion is the wrong is the idea that never having enough is ever going to be enough. And given that has never worked. It's interesting that we continue to try. And when we do, we're really subjecting everyone to less advantage than we would otherwise have, and less appreciation and less gratefulness, because we're not expressing the fullness of greatness that we've been given and are endowed with.
Yeah, that takes it back to the instincts in the beginning. There's never going to be enough food, sex, and drink to sustain our thoughts of reality.
Exactly. Which we talked about this morning. You can't have faith in faithless things and ever have enough faith. And you can't be willing to do the wrong thing and ever have enough willingness to make it right. If it's wrong, it's wrong because it doesn't have any basis in anything other than what you're thinking is right that isn't right. Same with trust. If you're trusting things that are not trustworthy, you could use all the trust you can muster, and it's just going to dissolve into that insatiable appetite of trying to fill a void that isn't trustworthy. And we can conclude those things and concede those things and reckon with those things a lot quicker than we can spend a lifetime trying to achieve those things and fail constantly and not notice that our success is, in fact, the failure. We're getting the right response. We're being told by nature what we're doing is wrong. We just don't want to read the language clearly. We don't want to take the signs. We don't want to read our body's language when we feel that discontent. And we'd rather make believe that somehow trying to feel better about it is the answer, which is exactly what addiction does.
Yeah,
If
they say
drinking,
Stephen Robinson, okay. Hi, little Maui population of 28.
in most allergies, people suffer consequences like peanut allergies. People tend to choke. They can't breathe. With alcohol and drugs, the allergic reaction feels better temporarily for a minute, a second, whatever the time is, feels better. So it gives us the impression it's a solution because the feeling is better. We're presuming the thought that underlies the feeling, the cause of the feeling that's bad that we're trying to feel better than, is in fact also corrected. There's the blindness, that blank spot, that the cause becomes corrected when we feel better. And it isn't corrected at all. It's actually ignored. And when you ignore something, it tends to grow if it has any basis. If the presumption is being maintained that something that's wrong is right, is maintained, it's going to grow in time, just like a seed grows in the ground. It doesn't mean it's real or true, but it means the impact of it is going to be the same because we're believing in it. We're trusting in it. We're having faith in it. We're causing an impact to give us witness to what we're doing. And that impact, if looked at clearly, would be a reckoning with the thinking we're doing rather than a directive to run away from, escape, or try to somehow overcome it by feeling better. You just take us back to the root of the thought and say, oh, I feel bad because I'm thinking thoughts that are bad. What would be bad? Something that doesn't work, something that's not going to work. So the more I work on it, the more exhausted I'm going to be, the more spent I'm going to be, the less time I'm going to have to do things that actually do work and wonder why my life goes to hell. So our thinking largely impacts our thinking, not reality and truth. When we're expressing reality and truth, we don't have to think about it much because we have an intuitive knowing of what to do. And we're actually employing it presently, even in the sick thinking we're doing, while we're trying harder and harder and harder to ignore the knowing we have by trying to dismiss the doubt and the insecurity and the underlying effects we're having and thinking about them as something to get over and to feel better about. They're actually telling us accurately what's happening, but we don't want to listen, so we're not going to take them as a lesson. We're not going to see them as a lesson. We're going to see them as a directive to escape and run and do all the things that impulsive, compulsive behaviors exhibit and reactive behaviors, defensive, irritable, restless, discontent, always on the move, looking for someplace else, trying to find something somewhere else with someone else in some quantity, more or less of something else, in some quantity that seems to be more acceptable than what we're actually witnessing. Jana, I muted you because I heard some background noise. So a possibility to consider during the silence, and I'd again like to really begin to engage on this in this conversation. It can seem, given that the propensity typically, in my experience, has been to refine the thinking that's wrong and use other people in that. Most of our relationships have been about trying to conspire with other people to feel better about what we're doing, and haven't always been frank enough and honest enough to actually talk about it in this universal, inclusive way. And I know that it can be a bit of a struggle because we've struggled with it since the beginning of our discussion. And the discussion's point is to focus on it, which is a discussion that begins to see what we are doing with the people around us to diminish their capacity, which is really a mirror image of the capacity we are diminishing in our own experience. And Gabe and I talked about that a little bit this morning too. If I'm seeing somebody else is incapable of listening, I'm noticing the incapacity I have to listen. I wouldn't be so clear about it if it wasn't something I'm doing. Even as I wouldn't be so clear about something, that moment of clarity wouldn't be so clear if I didn't have a sort of a sense of knowing that was greater than the thinking I was doing. Those moments of clarity are in alignment with knowing. They're not just popping in from somewhere else. They are actually revealing a present state of knowing and awareness that we have. So our guidance system, even in the irritability, Jana, I also muted you because you stepped away and we're talking to somebody, I think. So you might need to unmute yourself. The clarity that we get from other people is a chance to notice the things we're doing in relation to them that we're not interested in admitting we're doing. So we see it in other people. We see it in circumstances. We see it in situations. We see it in interrelationships, and largely it's interreactivity in the relationships. There's a certain repulsion. There's a certain grind. There's a certain something that's not going smoothly. But in looking at responsibility as an absolute state of being is beginning to actually simply concede that if I'm seeing it and witnessing it, Herb Kagan says, if you spot it, you got it. It's very simple. If I'm noticing it, it's not something, if I had absolutely no connection to it, just like a language I've never spoken or heard, there's a good chance I wouldn't understand it. If I have the clarity enough to see it as something as clearly as I tend to see wrong, I clearly have a connection to it that would have to be at least similar, but probably identical to the thing. I've been triggered by something someone else is doing, and I'm starting to see it as something I have. Now, I'm not great at that, but being able to even witness it and watch it begins to dissipate the tendency toward acting on it, just like Jana expressed in her dilemma with the family coming in. And most of the things I struggle with in that regard are things I don't expect, because the thoughts I hold to be true, I think all that should ever happen is what I expect. That's what my expectations are. There's nothing wrong with the expectations. What I've come to learn is that when I expect things to happen as they happen, it sort of diffuses the propensity I have to make believe that the only thing that should happen is what I thought would happen when I first made whatever decision I made or whatever thought I had. Those are all indications I think my thinking is so real that all that should ever happen is what I think. And when somebody dies unexpectedly, there's a lot of unexpected consequences of that you can't really plan for. Until you start realizing that everything possible is always possible, and start living in that awareness of knowing that you don't have to predict it for it to happen. You don't have to want it to happen for it to happen. And then start realizing that if everything that's happening is the only thing that's ever happening, it must be what we want because it's happening. How could there be anything else? We would be living at odds with everything all the time if we constantly thought we didn't want it because we didn't think it should be happening. When in fact, everything that's happening is always happening exactly as it's happening, whether we want it or not. So to want it is to utilize it. To not want it is to misutilize it, to fight it, to argue against it while it's happening. So you're in a moment where something's happening, thinking your thinking is going to dominate what's happening by thinking it shouldn't be happening, rather than at least conceding if it's happening, and I might as well work with what's happening because it's the only thing that's ever going to happen is everything that's happening right now. So that's reassuring, but it can be a little discombobulating to the thinking we've done, given the tendency we've developed, the ruts we often get stuck in relation to obsessive thinking, or that are easy to get stuck in, making believe they're the only place to go, the only thing to do.
I think one thing that we're not talking about a lot too is how much of a lie that you can actually lie to yourself and not even realize it, or realize it and continue doing it, and how much growth there could be to realizing that you're lying to yourself. I think that's where my breakthroughs have been lately, is to really accept what I've been lying about. Not that I've done it 100% right, but that's the hard part, is to be honest with yourself and to.
But think about that, Anthony. You're being honest with yourself, and the self you're being honest with is a lie. This is what we talked about earlier a little bit before we recorded with you specifically.
So I just said something that I think you should be honest with yourself, and you're saying that that's not even really possible. So that's
well, I'm mentioning that we don't need to talk to ourselves to know ourselves completely and absolutely. There's no conversation we need to have with that self to know it, if it's absolute.
That's an interesting point, because I always think I have to refine it and make sure that they're both connected and dialed in.
Exactly. To the point earlier, you think that thoughts are true and real, and immediately following the idea that thoughts are true and real, we think then we become our thoughts. Here's what's interesting. What does thinking about thinking produce? You answered it earlier.
More thinking.
Exactly. It doesn't produce me. It doesn't produce us. It doesn't produce a persona. It doesn't produce a character. But within the thinking, I can create all kinds of characters that I want to be and think about. But those are all thought-based. They're not reality-based. They're just in thought. They don't exist outside of my head. They only exist inside my head. That's the difference between self-centered thinking, is that we're thinking about thinking is centering our thinking on thought, not self. And yet we call it self-centered thought, self-induced thought, self-imposed thought, self-righteous thought, self-made thought. Think of it. It's self-made. The self that's made is one made in thought to be itself. Thinking about thinking itself creates more thought. It doesn't create who we are. And we have historically, when you're talking about the lies, if the primary basis of who we think we are is a lie, and it's wrong and we think it's right, which is the definition of it, if the primary basis of who we think we are is all those other things you think you need to be honest to, they're constantly going to be fractured states. It's like dividing 1 in half. You never get to 0. You never get free of a number. And the fractions get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. There's more and more and more beyond the decimal.
So that's kind of interesting. You're saying that being honest with yourself isn't the answer.
Well, I'm simply saying that we talk about it in those terms because we do believe our thoughts are true. We do believe we are only what we think. And so we talk about loving ourselves. If the nature of essence is love, if a source that's given everything to everyone and constantly gives it would be a pretty good definition of love, then that's our source. We don't have to love that, because we're already of it. It's the nature of our existence. So to think we have to do something about it is to think that I'm so powerful that until I do something, it doesn't exist. Again, same thing about reality. I have to think it's real before it becomes real, which means when I'm not thinking about it, it's not real. What do we learn in sobriety? We may be thinking about ourselves a little too much. What do people say? Don't take yourself seriously. Why would we be told not to take ourselves seriously if the thing that was ourself was seriously ourself? It's a joke. And you know what's the last person to appreciate the joke is generally the person the joke's on. Think about that. Everybody can be laughing, but the person who gets the chair pulled out from underneath them. It's not that funny when they hit the ground. We're doing it to ourself, thinking there's a self to do it to, and then trying to refine the self and the thinking we're doing by staying in that loop of obsessive thought, rather than say, who am I talking to? When I'm talking to myself, I'm talking to my thinking. When I'm thinking of myself, I'm thinking of my thinking. I'm not talking to myself. Myself has absolutely nothing to say, as evidenced by the group. When we start considering these principled things, everybody gets very quiet. Very little to say. But if in that quietness we can talk about the security of that stillness and the peace of that stillness and that sense of knowing, we're going to be saying things that you can't even imagine you said after saying them, and wonder how it was you had the insight to be so wise to say such things. Because it will be beyond the scope of your thinking about thinking, and you will simply be expressing the knowing that you've always had, always will have, you can't get away from. It's not an option. You'll start expressing the absolute essence of our existence, which isn't a self we can argue over because it's the same thing we all share. If it's absolute, it isn't mine, it isn't yours. We just have different bodies we've been given to express it. To the point earlier about wars, we literally fight wars over thoughts. People who don't think the same fight each other. They got to kill each other to prove that they have the better thinking. Must think thinking is pretty real. Must think thinking is the creator of reality and the creator of truth. To go so far, to be so wrong, and make believe that somehow the more we do it, the better we'll get. And we've done it through history. Not only in wars, in much more subtle ways that we subject people to oppression and suppression and take what's theirs or could be theirs for ours in the name of trying to be more secure and think that we're better off than they are, when we're actually creating the threat and the fear that we're actually thinking we're resolving. It's, again, perfect textbook circular notion of addiction. So I appreciate you brought that up, Anthony, because I know, since we've met, that's been a struggle you've had. And it's certainly been a struggle I've had as long as I've been thinking.
Uh-huh. Which part about just being honest with yourself?
Well, first of all, thinking about my thinking when I was a kid, I was always sort of a mad terror in my own thinking because I was so frustrated all the time trying to get my thinking right that I was troubled. And so I just caused a lot of trouble to share it. That was my way of neutralizing. I just figured if I had to live in trouble, everybody else I was going to share it with everybody.
Were you bigger than the other kid?
I was younger than them all. I was almost a year behind everybody as I grew up. So probably, yeah.
Because you're a January birthday or December?
Late November, yeah.
I'm January too. That puts you at a disposition because women mature faster. So you're a year ahead of everybody, and the girls are maturing faster than boys. So you're like 2 years behind the women, or the girls, I keep saying.
Oh, I was about 12 years behind the women. But the point is that I recognized as I got clearer that struggle started very, very young, and that I was traumatized by my own mistaken identity in terms of my thinking being who I was. Now, historically, if we've been doing this for as long as we've been doing it, we're looking to adults for direction. And if adults are doing that, we assimilate it thinking it's the normal thing to do and the right thing to do. But most parents hope their kids outgrow them as people, outdo them as people, get better than them as people. And yet in this one regard, we haven't ever really done that. We've actually gotten better at being worse and better at being more psychotic and better at being insane.
And also, too, now that I'm thinking about
it normal.
And you always hear, just think about it before you do it. That's always you hear. Just think first.
My mom used to say, "What were you thinking?" And I'd spend like a month thinking about that. Do you ever think, what's it going to take to get this through your thick skull? And I'm like, a lot, apparently. Who do you think you are? Like, well, I'm going to think about that. But think about
I guess the struggle. So I'm seeing the struggle is where you're not living up to who you think you should be. That's for me. Like if I think I should be something more.
But Anthony, if your thoughts are insatiable because they're always competing against your own thoughts.
Yeah.
You're trying. Here's the absolute again revealing itself. You're trying to break the limits of your thoughts while not noticing that because they're wrong, they're insatiable. You'll never be able to satisfy them. You're pouring water down the throat of the guy next to you, wondering why you're thirsty.
Yeah.
In your imagination, you're fulfilling the illusory delusion that who you are is this thing. And it's kind of like believing that you finally get to the mirage and you see another mirage that, you know what, I need to expend the rest of my energy getting to the next mirage, killing myself to get there, when you've just realized that getting to the one that you finally got to, there was nothing there but sand and heat. There was no water. There was no promise. The promise of addiction, the promise of a lie, is a broken promise. Why? Because we cannot achieve what doesn't exist. And what's ironic is we're trying to achieve what doesn't exist while we're denying everything that does exist. So the thing we're actually looking for and what doesn't exist is the thing we already have with everything we have now. But you know what we don't have? Credit. And you know why we need credit? Because the idea is we're perpetuating our bankrupt. And we're looking for credit for what we're doing because we don't want to simply say, thank you, I'm grateful, I appreciate it, and act in accordance with that knowing nature. When we do, we become appreciable. We become grateful because we become full of the greatness of an absolute power, an absolute essence, one that doesn't die, one that isn't at risk, one that doesn't have scarcity, that is completely fulfilling and always has been, while we've been making up a whole storyline to try to make believe it isn't true.
And I guess that's a little bit of your imagination too. If you're just talking about imagination, you're imagining this this source that has all this power. That's strictly from your imagination.
Well,
you've never seen it. You've never talked to it.
Right. But it's interesting that we would consider the limited imagination real and true, rather than notice that every limited idea is limited by something that must not be limited. Right? So if you start looking at it and say, oh, what would be beyond the limits? Why, if everything is finite, what would be next to finite?
The outer limits.
So here's the confirmation, though, Anthony. Just like in sobriety, if you begin to talk honestly about what you're doing, all of a sudden you have a sense of freedom. What do we do in this obsessive thinking? We have a sense of condemnation. Why would we be condemned? Because we're trying to do something that's impossible.
Hey.
Wow, thank you.
Is that a new vase in the back there near your TV?
Probably.
You're just seeing if I'm paying attention.
Katie likes ceramics.
Yeah, I like that one. That fits the spot better.
Starting to see things clearly, you begin to see that the absolute is always right in front of us. And the certainty of it, if something's absolute, it doesn't change. So that would be very simple, right? That would be very stable.
Say that again. What would be stable?
Something that's simple would be not changing. It doesn't change. Would be an absolute nature. So it doesn't have this process of change. There's no things in it. There's no bits and pieces. There's no here and there. There's no then and now. It's just an absolute state of present being. It's an essence.
An absolute.
And it's basically what people have referred to as God. And yet we've humanized God to make believe God gives and takes and hates us and is pissed off and all the things that we do. All of a sudden we've imbued God to have. How would that be possible? That we can take an infinite source, something that gives everything all the time, which would effectively be love, and convert it into a hateful, fearful, rageful, give and take sort of person, when that's exactly what we do, and not notice how quickly we are to assign our own attributes to a loving power while we dismiss that love and power in our own experience. Interesting. Not a coincidence. We're doing it to try to bring balance to the insanity. There is no balance in insanity. The whole point is it's unstable. Why? It has no potential. It's always going to be caustic. It's always going to be toxic. It's always going to be entertaining ideas that have no basis. It disrupts nature. It does not solidify or express nature. But the nature it expresses is impossibility and condemnation, contempt, spite, hate, fear, all those things. And if you're interested in remedying those things in your experience, I will suggest to you they're not there for any other reason than your own insistence that you persist in thinking about them as though they're true and real. That's it.
I was just thinking, if I never met you, it would just be you talking to Gabe and MK right now.
And Jana and Katie and JP and
Well, not Jana though, because I told Jana about this meeting.
oh,
So it would just be this little group. Because we're pretty small right now. I guess because of the confusion on the email.
There's no confusion. Quick.
remember when we went from 10 to 9? We were meeting at 10 and we went to 9.
Yeah.
The group went from like 15 to 3. Like that completely threw everybody. You know, what's interesting is people say they don't like change, and yet this human life form is constantly changing. Now, how can you not like change and have something constantly changing and have and feel like you enjoy what's happening?
I'm just glad I met you because you're really helpful.
Well, I appreciate meeting you, Anthony. You've been very willing despite your obstinance.
Now I'm supposed to say thank you, Anthony, for introducing me.
Yes, hello. Aren't
I
you?
knew it was
Where's your-
coming. I knew you needed that. Thank you, Anthony.
That's not what I meant. I knew it came out that way, but that's not what I was just thinking. Like, what would happen if I wasn't here? I'm like, would these guys still be talking here?
But you see, Anthony, how you think about non-existence. That's addictive thinking is the attempt to not exist. That's why it's a suicidal tendency and why people think killing themselves is a solution. They're trying to stop the thinking that they're unwilling to address accurately and honestly. And I would say socially, we've not been very good at talking about this to allow those people who are at that extreme point to have a gap in the game to consider that maybe there's something. Even Shakespeare in To Be or Not to Be talks about perchance there's a dream. He's talking about killing yourself and says perhaps the dream. And then he says, well, wait, if we're dreaming, we're still awake.
Yeah.
It makes cowards of us all because we wonder if there isn't something more going on. And yet people are being driven to the point of suicide today more than ever. In
Right.
every
Katie
category.
leaves the meeting. Katie leaves the meeting, and now we bring up Shakespeare, right on her strong point.
That fell flat.
Well,
The pictures of your girlfriend are obnoxious. They cost you $10,000. They're not impressive.
the point is that this awareness has been going
More than
on this struggle has been going on a long time, and it has been recognized for a long time.
Yeah.
And it has almost been thought of as a mystery when it isn't. It's not mysterious at all. It's in plain view and it's a choice.
Choose love.
We can think we're not doing what we're doing while we're doing what we're doing. That means we could be doing right now things we don't think we're doing and think we're not doing them. That is not a good setup for honesty and truthfulness and reality, because it's never going to align. It's always going to be an illusion. It's always going to be an illusion thought to be a delusion. And there's nothing wrong with illusions or delusions. When you start seeing them for what they are and living them with them for what they are, they will typically disappear because there's no opposition anymore. The only way that a lie is maintained is by opposing reality and truth, by opposing that it's a lie. What does a lie claim? It's true. That constant reinforcement that it's true is what maintains the lie.
So is that where the problem is trying to make it not into a lie?
Well, think of how obsessive your thinking has to be to try to turn something that isn't true into truth, and it can never be done.
Right.
So the whole obsessive thinking is any thought we're maintaining that isn't true as true, filled with this constant maintenance.
Yeah.
Which we know if we don't think about, then we think it's who we are. So we have to think about ourselves more and more. And we think by thinking about ourselves, we actually are saving ourselves while in fact we're killing ourselves, because it's the anxiety and the stress of the whole process is wearing us out.
Uh-oh.
Sweetheart, you may be offering a little more.
This is going to be interesting in a minute.
Oh, God. Oh, God. We didn't see anything. You're cool, Katie.
Anthony,
oh,
that was free.
Yeah, well,
This is the best meeting I've ever been to.
there's the mental obsession. Me and me and me. Bye.
Well,
Yeah,
sweetheart,
send her a check.
Katie,
Yeah, glad
We
I
were
can
just-
come to the meeting. Yeah.
we were just talking about to be or not to be. We were talking about to be or not to be. What is the phrase where he says perhaps to drink and herein is the rub?
I don't remember.
Oh,
To dream,
Is
to
it dream
dream.
or drink? I never heard drink.
dream.
Yeah, he said drink though, I think.
I don't know. I don't know it off the top of my head. But many interpretations of to be or not to be.
Of course.
You sound good. I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, he's great.
Well, she lives with me, so she gets 6 hours of this every day.
I'm the judge over here. I'm like, yeah, how's that mental obsession going? But no, it's good. Sounds really good.
So
I was
it's
thinking about it because of the play, and it's so true. Like how, after you perform the obsession, you're like, you do this whole thing to be generous to others, and then you're like, oh my God, do they love me? Do they love me? Do they hate me?
and I will assure you that when Katie gets ready, she commits, man. I find her in the
Yeah.
bathroom at midnight, sitting there reading lines to herself all the way home from the Palm Desert. She's going over everything.
Oh yeah.
So he
well,
says, the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to, talking about no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the 1,000 natural shocks that flesh is heir to. It's talking about stopping the pain of human existence. 'Tis a consummation devoutly to be wished for, to die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come when we have shuffled off this mortal coil should give us pause, meaning the body is dead and yet we're still capable of awareness and consciousness. And that's where the pause comes from.
Wow.
Now, Shakespeare, when was Shakespeare writing? 1400, sweetheart? 1500s?
yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. All I know is if I do Shakespeare, I'm going to have you come and tell me what I'm saying, because
Yeah.
it takes people forever to figure out what it's saying, and you just whip it off. So,
All right, I'll do that.
okay.
I hope
I'm going to
that's
wash my face.
love you. So again, jumping to this near-death experience thing, I researched a little bit this past year. Do we need to be at death to finally begin to admit the nature of our absolute life? Do we need to
No.
come to the point at which our thoughts are so overwhelmed by an experience that almost, imagine being near death in an experience, and imagine being so beyond the thinking that would normally be compelling to you about what's happening because you're facing something like a car is 20 feet away and it's doing 90 and you know you can't get out of its way. There is a moment that all of a sudden, all the typical thinking we do, we apparently suspend, because people who go through these experiences have this awesome awareness of an absolute welcoming, available, receptive, loving presence that is with them. Do we need to subject ourselves to death? Which again, if you think of suicide and what Shakespeare said, we're trying to tempt fate by claiming we'll finally realize what we're simply unwilling to acknowledge we're doing in the present. By having this constant obsessive thinking give us the impression it's the only thing we can do, rather than begin to eliminate it and notice that that white light awareness is always present, always with us, always available, always in reach, always our heritage and always our entitlement, because it is our essence, it is our existence. Naturally, if that white light, that power, that source, that life is our existence, and we are squandering it simply by dabbling in voodoo thoughts and taboos in terms of what we're doing with thinking that somehow we can turn it into reality and truth. We're trying to take claim for creating reality and truth rather than simply say thanks and be grateful for reality and truth as being the source of all things. Everything, love, anything valuable, anything useful, anything abundant. And all the rest of it is just a deceptive illusion treated as though it's real, which is a delusion, which is insanity. To even think it exists and is anything other than an effect we're creating by a cause we're choosing.
So our mere existence entitles us to the miracle, and the miracle is a change in perception. And I choose love in every circumstance.
Well, and the beauty there too is to realize you don't have to choose it.
That's true. It just is.
The real concession is to say it's already there. Now, when I choose it, I know I'm choosing in accordance with what's happening, in alignment with what's happening.
Accordance.
In relation.
Always come up with something good. Always right at the end. You haven't used accordance for months. Accordance. Okay, I'm writing that down.
Well, it's like alignment.
I know, but still, it kind of like changes it up. It's next level. Makes you pay attention.
Well, you like the Course in Miracles, and the Course in Miracles says there are no levels in miracles.
That's right. You can find your car keys, or you can like breathe life into someone who's choking.
But it's also pointing to the fact that the miracle is the essence of essence, and within the essence of essence, it isn't a miracle at all. And there are no levels to it. It's just an absolute state of being that doesn't come and go, can't be more or less, can't be here or not there. It's just
your
a state
awareness. Your awareness can be more or less, and my awareness.
Your thinking awareness, I would say your absolute awareness isn't.
Right. My thinking awareness of my usefulness because of my neutrality, which came from my responsibility, and being able to, I don't know if I want to say give it up, but stop seeking the parade and just finding that kind of, and it, I don't know, like we were hanging out with this guy yesterday that we just met yesterday, and we went down to the waterfall and stuff. And I have a friend that's he's probably the one that was chatting when I wandered off because there was no one else here. So it was just him chatting because he was listening to you guys, and he can be a lot. And all the guy saw was light. And he goes, that guy is beautiful. And I'm like, I'm so glad you saw his wings. And he goes, yeah, some people you have to crash land to get their wings to come out, but his were apparent. And I was just like thinking like, wow, that guy just wanders around just in neutrality. Like he's not judging anybody. He's just like, I don't want to say happy because that sort of infers the parade, but really non-judgmental and
content is probably that balanced state where it doesn't have to be exciting and exhilarating and all that stuff, and it doesn't have to be depressing. It's just a state of awareness that's at peace and quiet.
Content and useful kind of go hand in hand somehow for me these days. Yeah,
well, it's useful because it's aligned with everything that can be used. It's full of usefulness. It's full of use.
It swipes away the fear, which is the fear to me is the doubt. It doesn't mean that I know everything, but
But think about that, Jana. You wouldn't know to have doubt if you didn't know more than you were thinking. That doubt is an inherent, starting to give credit where credit is due, is starting to say that this whole experience we have that is difficult is giving us absolutely correct information that we are misreading by thinking of them as things to run from rather than say, wow, this is my textbook for my entire existence as a human, telling me exactly what I'm doing that's wrong. And if I look at it and say, wow, of course I'm doubting this. It's doubtful. Why wouldn't I be? Of course it's uncertain and I feel uncertainty. The thinking is uncertain. And I'm being given that the immediacy of that reflection in the effects I witness because I'm designed to recognize what's wrong so that I can correct it and adjust accordingly again. And if I'm doing that, there's a good chance I'm going to survive and thrive. And what does that mean? I'm going to have more to give. And what I'm going to really have is much more than I need. So I'm going to want to give it away because I don't need any more than I need. Just like nature, trees do not drink all the water of the neighboring trees. They just take what they need. And what do they need? Only to grow. That's all. just like us. We're going another day. We need another day's worth of water and air. And we don't seem to argue about taking breaths. We expect it to be there. But when it comes to something absolute that we can't see, and Anthony, we don't see the air, but we rely on it all the time. We think we need to see the thing to confirm it, because if it isn't visible to our body, it doesn't exist. That means everything beyond the capacity of our senses doesn't exist. And yet we have a sense of things that don't exist as being present, because we have an absolute knowing that helps us see what's wrong clearly. That's pretty profound, to see how the absolute is working in our favor the whole time, while we have been acting as though the disfavor we create is the primary experience we're having, when in fact it's been a self-imposed, self-induced by a self that doesn't exist, is just thinking about thinking, and induced by a self that we make believe exists, which then of course induced depression. Why wouldn't it? Because the weighty idea of the thought that we could suspend reality and truth and vacate an absolute state of being that we have in the name of thought would be a great diminishment and a great reason for self-loathing, low self-esteem, lack of self-worth. Think of all those words that are attached to it. Self. We need more self-confidence. Why? Because the confidence in the self is zero. It has, not only does it have no confidence, it has no potential for confidence, because it has nothing other than what I think about it. So if I think more and more and more and more, and I think that's confidence, all I'm doing is fueling something that's actually less and less and less. How can I ever fill that? The more I give it, the less it gets. Never going to happen. It's insatiable. That's addiction. It's a mental problem.
Well, I was thinking that it was I know this is going to be rebutted somehow, so whatever the fuck, I'm just going to say it. I thought it was like leaps and bounds in my growth to be able to say all day long, like, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. And I know I was sharing that with everybody. Like, now when I freak out, or when I start getting doubtful, or I start judging, or I start going off course or whatever, I say it's okay. I'm not doing that anymore. I feel like I'm next level now. I just inherently know that it's all okay. And that must be the contentment thing.
Well, and haven't you found that clarity gives you better clarity of the things that do come up that seem to be old, seem to be repetitive, seem to be dysfunctional?
Yeah, and I try and conjure them up because they're familiar. And I can't do it anymore. They just seem fucking stale and stupid. And like, I wouldn't even call you up and share them with you now. I'd be like, oh man, he's just.
But do you find circumstances sometimes give you an opportunity to notice those sort of deficient thinking?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So that dynamic is how we're designed. It's kind of like if you're at the edge of a cliff, it's a pretty good potential that we know not to take the next step. It's not an accident. We have an awareness of those things. Now, we could fly, but you're going to fly until you crash. You're right. You'll fly 500 feet, 1,000 feet, whatever it is, but you're going to land hard. It's probably not going to go well. So you've got about 2-3 seconds of flying to prove you're right before you realize that the consequence was a little steeper than you imagined. Right?
Yeah.
So all those things are possible. We can take those steps. We can do those things. We can be wrong. We can absolutely be wrong all the time. And my experience is I'm largely wrong.
Yeah.
If too. I wasn't wrong, I wouldn't have the ability to correct and to learn and to become a better sailor.
Yeah. I don't feel like defending or like I have to explain myself anymore, but there's a lot less words involved than there were like even a year ago. It's just a lot less words, and there's no resentments. It's not like I'm simmering, I'm not going to say anything because, you know what I mean? It's not like wallowing or withholding because I'm wallowing or feeling chagrined or whatever the fuck. It's just more that contentment thing, and it's just lovely. I'm growing up.
Yeah. You know what comes with maturity?
I don't know. Saggy boobs.
Well, I wasn't actually thinking
that.
It was one of the rare moments I wasn't thinking about boobs. The ripening of maturity is sweetness.
Oh, that's true. Think of a mango.
Good one. Yeah.
And the bitterness is the lack of maturity. So when we're fighting to be immature, because we're not growing, we're not developing, we're not noticing the guidance system that we've been given to help foster the directions we take and the benefits we are able to produce for others. I mean, what can be greater than be able to actually do something that benefits someone else? We know in sobriety that that's one of the greatest experiences you can have, is to see the lights come on in somebody else, where they become self-supporting, not because they're relying on us and we're doing everything for them. That's not the solution. The solution is beginning to reckon with the idea that everyone has the capacity, to any degree they have the capacity. And if you allow them that capacity, they will start doing things that nobody would have thought they would have done, because none of us in our limited thinking gives anyone as much credit as they actually deserve, any more than we give our own real self that credit, when we're constantly thinking about who we think we are as being all that we are.
But I don't think there is any they or else.
Well, in the meantime, I tend to refer to people by their name, and I mean, there is this
Am I going
interactive.
too far?
There is. Well, you're right in an
All
absolute
right, I'm
sense.
calling it.
You're right on it. You're right on it. And
There is a
then,
they. There is an
then
else.
if you send your mortgage check to the guy down the block, it may cause a problem with your property. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, there are functional things that we have agreements that we do that to basically help facilitate how things are. Now, I would say if the basis of the thinking we've been doing is wrong, that a lot of those things are very dysfunctional and very inefficient and very ineffective as a result. But they are the agreements we've made. And as we are better, perhaps we can influence better agreements and better awarenesses. And as a result of any health people experience, they tend to be better in everything that they do in relation to that growing health. And mental health is critical to the physical health because it impacts all of our natural systems in ways that are negative. When we're thinking in ways that are sick, our bodies end up assimilating that sickness and tension and stress and all kinds of conditions that are not natural, but they're natural for that sick thinking to cause as a guidance system to tell us something's wrong. It's again, our body's saying something's wrong here. You're doing something wrong. I don't always know the answer, but I certainly generally figure out the problem pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So health-wise, Katie has helped me with this a lot. There are solutions that people don't tend to think are solutions. And there are other things promoted that are not solutions for the sake of commercializing people's hunger for healing and resolution. But I would suspect, given that each of us has a chemical factory as complex as any pharmaceutical company on the planet has, and I would say not only as complex, I would say exponentially more complex, that when our thinking thinks properly, our bodies will heal properly because they will know what to do with what's happening rather than just try everything because I'm not making sense with anything I'm asking for it to do. Our bodies are aligned to function naturally, not unnaturally. And when they break down, they're naturally expressing the unnatural consequence that we impose on our bodily systems. So that's why getting sleep and drinking plenty of water and eating properly and all that stuff makes a dramatic impact on our experience, because our senses depend on those experiences. If we're at threat, if we're putting our body at risk, our senses are going to be on high alert. They're not going to be easy. They're not going to be at rest. They're not going to be content. They're not going to be able to express the awareness that we've naturally been given, because they'll be preoccupied with an awareness of something we're doing that's causing an internal problem that, if we're committed to continuing to maintain it, is going to seem insurmountable and impossible to ever overcome because we're not willing to stop. Or actually, more primary than that, we're willing to continue to restart it and restart it and restart it, thinking someday this will prove I'm true and I'm right. It's crazy.
So is addiction.
That's what it is.
Exactly.
That's the definition of addiction. When I'm thinking more and more, thinking is going to solve the problem that thinking's creating. I'm trying to affect the effect as the cause. I'm trying to turn the effect into the cause and think that what I need to do is feel better about it, rather than see that the cause is causing the effect. And if I begin to notice what I'm doing to cause it, I can begin not to stop it, but I can begin not to start it. Just like they say in Alcoholics Anonymous, it's not the last drink that kills us, it's the first one. It's not the second drink, it's the first one. If we start it, we're going to be on that cycle of thinking it needs to be maintained to some degree.
This is perfect for my 4th step that I'm redoing.
Yeah.
I've stopped reading the big book because I went beyond the 4th step, and now I'm just on my 12 by 12, thoroughly going through it, and I'm seeing all these things that are making so much sense to me again, but nonetheless.
Well, notice in there too that in the 12 and 12, Bill writes a lot more about infinite possibilities and healing at a level that includes all difficulties and defects. He's referencing that stuff in a whole different ways. 12 years, I believe, into sobriety at that point. So he had some more experience. And actually, when he wrote the 12 and 12, he'd never done the steps. He'd only done the 6 Oxford steps. And one of his spiritual advisors say, you're struggling with it because you haven't done them. Why don't you do the steps and then write about them? So even Bill needed some direction, and he got plenty of it from plenty of people, lots and lots and lots of people. I was given something by a guy named Tom down at the South Bay Lano Club recently that was the Recovery Bible, and it has William James and a guy named Ralph Waldo Trine, who I connected a link to. If you listen to Ralph Waldo Trine, he wrote this book back in the 1800s. It sold 2 million copies. And it's on Apple Podcasts and all that. And if you listen to what he's talking about the infinite as being the absolute nature of our existence and how we can utilize it in our human experience to be abundant and to express and to heal and to pass on beneficial ideas and thoughts and performances, actions to others. So
Trine, Trine.
Yeah, it's at the top of the list below the
On the kind.
in the announcement. Yeah. But the one that's on there is the YouTube thing. I found one on the YouTube thing. You can't leave without listening through it, and it's a 4-hour listen. But on Apple Podcasts, if you put his name in, you can come up with, I think there's 18 different segments. So you can listen to them one at a time and then go back to the ones you haven't listened to a lot easier. Love you guys. I appreciate this.
Thank you, Jack. Bye.
I look forward
Thanks,
to
Jack.
it. I miss you guys the days we have off.
Okay,
and-
I liked your insights. Aloha. Bye, Gabe.
Appreciate you
Bye,
all as
guys.
well.
Thanks all.
I'm glad
Right.
Katie came today. It was nice.
Me too.
Ciao.